The cabin is as quiet as a library before closing. The liner is heavy, smooth, and confident. It walks along the center of the runway, and in those seconds the whole world shrinks to three things. The axial line, breathing into the microphone and looking at the speed scale. On the Airbus A330, this is the left column of the main flight display. Normally there is a green ribbon that comes to life after 30 knots. Now there is emptiness. The liner is racing, the landing gear is rattling at the joints, and the instrument speed is not moving. 0. It's like driving on a highway with a taped fuel indicator. Everything seems to be fine, the engine is pulling, the GPS numbers are growing briskly, but there is no main number. The commander sees the red flag, hears the same barely noticeable tension in the co-pilot's voice. It's not panic yet, but it's not routine anymore. Someone else's conversation about the tugboat and the platform is on the frequency at this moment. Unnecessary noise where silence is needed now. The paradox is that an airplane flies best when the pilots make a minimum of movements and a maximum of correct choices. Here, on the contrary, there is movement, the run continues, and the choice has turned into uncertainty. As a pilot, you have room for maneuver up to 100 knots. Almost any mistake is a reason to stop. After that, the philosophy changes. Continue unless something really dangerous has happened. And it's just into this fine line that the cognitive echo gets stuck. Speed 0, 100 knots. Continue? The second half of the brain pulls forward. The thrust is set, the temperature is normal, there are no vibrations. The first one whispers, the speed values don't match. And between these two voices, the plane is already crossing the threshold, beyond which stop turns into let's fly. The contrast is especially striking if you mentally move away from the cockpit by a dozen meters, towards the nose. There are 3 tiny receivers on each side, thin cylinders with a hole at the end. They are designed for air like a stethoscope tube for a doctor. Their task is simple and elegant, to catch the incoming flow, measure the dynamic pressure, and, subtracting the static, turn the difference into speed. No magic, aerodynamics, and precise sensors. On modern airliners, this system is repeatedly backed up. 3 independent sources, 3 paths of the same truth. But truth has an enemy that is so ridiculous that it is difficult to take it seriously. A small team from the insect world that sees in these holes not aircraft sensors, but ideal apartments. We used to think that threats to big machines should be big too. Thunderstorms, powerful wind shear, turbine failure. But here is a warm country, humid air, evening on the platform, and somewhere nearby a tiny creature armed with clay and instinct is working. The mud wasp cannot read flight manuals, but it understands perfectly well that a narrow tube with flat walls is a reliable place for laying. She needs some time. To the plane, a bit of inattention. And now 2 straight lines that should not intersect suddenly coincide. On the other hand, aviation is not about chance or fatalism. It's about barriers. Every step, every convinced, every confirmed. Where one link can falter, the other must hold. If the ground technician has put a plug on it, the one who reads the logbook is obliged to know about it and write it down. If the checklist item in the cabin asks about locking pins and protective covers, the answer should not be automatic. If someone doubts who makes the final detour before towing, there can be no doubt you need to appoint a specific person. Dr. Reeson's model, the Swiss one with holes, in reality looks not like a safety lecture, but like a fragile ensemble of people, habits, discipline, and at the same time human physiology. In the cockpit, you can look and not see inattentional blindness when there is an object in the field of vision, but the expectations of the brain throw it out of the picture. Especially if no one puts covers by default between flights, and you don't expect to see a red ribbon on the sensor in advance. Let's go back to the cockpit, where solutions are more expensive than explanations. When the instrument speed is silent, the world does not disappear. There are reference values that are taught to keep as a mantra: pitch and thrust. On the A330, this is a special philosophy. If you don't trust speed numbers, trust geometry and mechanics. Set the right angle, set the correct mode, keep the line, and the plane will remain in a zone where it is stable and predictable. But to do this, you need to take a step that is difficult, to admit that ordinary eyes are unreliable. While the brain is looking for another way to check, time is narrowing. The symptoms at this moment are insidious. The receiver heaters can burn through part of the barrier, The scale will come to life for a moment, show something plausible, and immediately betray. A brief flash of false clarity is more dangerous than honest darkness. And then there's the contrast again. Outside, Brisbane at night, a sea of lights, smooth air, almost no wind. The conditions are textbook, like mild, gentle. Inside, there is a change in the laws of control. The liner leaves the comfortable normal law with its protections from the pilot's stupidities and slides into a mode where protection is already you. He offers his shoulder, but does not lead by the hand. The phrase autopilot is unavailable ceases to be a line in ECAM and becomes part of the landscape. Then only manual, only calculation. And yet aviation is strong not only with barriers but also with mutual assistance. One speaks, the other listens. One leads, the other counts. The dispatcher tells you the ground speed on the radar, and you check with what you have left reliable. There is a hidden trump card on the A330 in case the classic sources of speed are lost. A special scale that does not show the number how many knots, but shows where it is safe to keep the aircraft by a combination of thrust and angle. This is not magic, it is a visualized table from QRH transferred to the screen. To use it, you need to make another adult decision, to turn off what you used to trust and turn on what is saving right now. The most amazing thing on the apron of large airports is how easy it is to get along with simple things next to high technology. A stepladder and an indicator tape, a technical magazine and human fatigue, warning letters and the habit of doing as always. Big airliners fly because thousands of little things are done on time. Conversely, one small thing, postponed for later, can squeeze in between the efforts of dozens of people. There will be no big words in this story. There will be a careful analysis of how a small creature, a few mislines and one or two, I'll think about it later, brought the crew to take off with 0 on the scale. And at the same time, how professionalism, composure, and very specific technical actions brought the situation back under control. Pilots often say that a flight is a series of expectations and confirmations. You expect to see certain parameters and you confirm them. If there is no confirmation, this is not a reason to panic. It is a reason to switch to another support. This prologue is like an entrance door. Behind it is a long chain of solutions, from the apron to the glide path, from the random insect to the systems that Airbus hid for a rainy day. We will walk along it slowly, but without stopping. We will alternately look at the details through a magnifying glass and then at the whole picture again. Because this is the only way to understand the main thing. There is no just luck in aviation. There is training, discipline, and the ability to look where the brain especially does not want to notice anything. Nature knows how to surprise with contrast. On the one hand, there is the airfield in Brisbane, where the rhythm of huge turbines, the smell of aviation fuel, and the lights of taxiways can be heard in the evening air. On the other hand, there are tiny insects that use the moist earth to seal up small holes in the most unexpected places. Mud wasps. They were named that way for a reason. They use clumps of mud to build their nests. Inside these clay cylinders, they leave eggs and a supply of paralyzed insects so that the larva has a ready meal. Their biology is simple and ingenious at the same time. Everything is designed for survival. The peculiarity of mud wasps is that they do not choose tree hollows or crevices in rocks. They need smooth, even cavities, and there are plenty of them in the human world. From door locks and ventilation pipes to electrical panel connectors. But the biggest temptation is the neat holes of the air pressure receivers on the nose of the aircraft. Their diameter, depth, and protection from rain are ideal for wasps. For an engineer, this is a sensor that hundreds of lives on board depend on. For the wasp, it's a cozy apartment with a storage room. Australia is generally a special place. Almost every living being there knows how to create a problem for a person, sometimes without even realizing it. And if snakes and spiders can be seen and bypassed, then everything is more difficult with wasps. Research has shown that 20 minutes after the plane stops are enough for them to start exploration and start construction. 20 minutes is less than it takes passengers to board and disembark, refuel, and check oil. For aviation, this figure is alarming. It turns out that there is already a risk of nest formation between flights, even during a short stay. This is especially true for Brisbane. The east coast of Australia is an area with a humid and warm climate, and the airport is surrounded by greenery and ponds. The wasp season there is similar to the rainy season. They are active, there are thousands of them, and no one can completely isolate the airfield from their invasions. Try to imagine. Everything in the terminal is subject to strict regulations. Every step of the ground services is scheduled by the minute. And in parallel, another world is working nearby, a wild, uncontrollable one, where a small wasp lays the foundation for a chain of events in just a few minutes that can bring an entire aviation system to its knees. In aviation, they like to say, every hole on an airplane is made for a reason. It's true. Air pressure receivers are not just sensors. This is the basis of all navigation. They don't show altitude or tell you where to fly, but they do give you something without which all other parameters become meaningless: speed. The incoming airflow turns into dynamic pressure, which, when compared with static pressure, gives the figure IAS, indicated airspeed. And if these tubes are blocked, the aircraft loses its sense of energy. He can gain an angle of attack too high, fall off, or vice versa, go down too fast, destroying the structure. The contrast is that speed is always obvious to the passenger. You're sitting in an armchair, you can feel the acceleration, you can see the clouds outside the window. But for the pilot, the feeling of speed is an illusion. He relies on numbers. The 200-ton liner accelerates smoothly, and the body in the chair is unable to distinguish 250 kilometers per hour from 300. Only the device gives the truth. And it is this truth that can be stolen by creatures a couple of centimeters in size. The Australian aviation authorities understood the threat. Since 2015, they have started sending warnings to airlines. Use protective covers on the receivers, especially if the plane is parked for a long time. Cases are a simple, almost primitive thing. A red mitten with an indicator ribbon that is impossible to miss. But as is often the case where everything looks too simple, there is a great temptation to neglect. Why put it on and take it off if you've done it before? This thought has become the very small crack in the system, where a whole stream of errors will soon fall. And here comes the paradox again. In aviation, every innovation must go through dozens of instructions, approvals, and signatures. It takes years to implement a new fuel management algorithm or alarm system. And the solution that can close the hole costs a penny and takes a few seconds. Put a case on the sensor. And it was this element that became the key in the story where the tiny insect met the giant Airbus A330. If you ask a random passenger, where are the most important devices on the plane? Many will answer, in the cabin. But the paradox is that the cabin only reads the information, and the heart of navigation is outside. Small air pressure receivers located on the sides of the nose work without interruption while the aircraft is alive. Their diameter is only a few millimeters, and it is through them that all information about speed passes. The principle is simple and elegant. When the aircraft accelerates, the incoming airflow flies into a tiny hole and creates excessive pressure. This pressure is called dynamic pressure. It is compared to the ambient air pressure, which is taken in through separate static ports on board. The difference between the two values gives the instrument speed, IAS, indicated airspeed. For a pilot, this figure is the basis of everything. Not the roll angle, not the engine power, but the speed. This is what decides whether it is possible to lift the nose, whether it is safe to release the flaps, whether the critical angle of attack is close. Speed in aviation is not just a number on the screen. This is the energy of the aircraft, its survivability. When the airliner goes too slowly, the wing loses lift, and the car may fall. When it is too fast, the load on the structure and flaps becomes dangerous. For the Airbus A330, the design ranges are set with node accuracy. Therefore, any distortion of the readings is a roulette game. It is for this reason that each liner has not one, but three independent receivers at once. They are connected to three separate channels of the Air Data System ADR. Airbus, like any modern aircraft, is built according to the philosophy of redundancy. If one sensor is lying, the other two allow you to calculate the truth. This is a barrier that should protect the crew from single failures. But this barrier only works if the failure is an accident. When all three receivers are physically closed, the system remains without a source of truth. She's trying to build logic on GPS, the inertial IRS system, and angle of attack, but the algorithms are programmed to trust LDP primarily. If there is no signal or it is unreliable, everything else is gradually discarded. Automatic protection becomes a source of additional confusion. Imagine a car where the speedometer has turned off. The driver can still feel the speed by the sound of the engine, by vibration, by the trees outside the window. These landmarks don't work on an airplane. At altitude, the sound of the turbines is the same at 250 and at 350 kilometers per hour. The illusion of stability deceives even experienced pilots. Without instruments, speed remains a mystery. These holes, which cannot be closed, have simultaneously become a magnet for mud wasps. The diameter of a few millimeters is perfect for their instincts. For engineers, this is the entry point into the world of aerodynamics. For an insect, it's a place for the future generation. And that's where the conflict arises: nature versus technology. One wants to survive, the other wants to fly safely. The contrast is especially striking if you remember. The receivers look insignificant. They can be mistaken for protruding tubes, random parts. But it is they who provide what turns a Whopper weighing hundreds of tons into a controlled object. And if the passenger is admiring the flight, admiring the clouds outside the window, then the pilot keeps in mind a specific number, 160 knots, for separation. Without it, the liner is like a blindfolded man walking along the edge of a cliff. Now let's imagine the scene. It's a quiet evening on the Brisbane platform. The wind is light, the equipment is refueling. The crew is preparing for the next flight. The cabin will consider the mass, alignment, calculation of the decision speed V1. Everything is clear, everything is according to the procedures. But at the same moment, beyond the range of attention, 3 small sensors are covered with plugs. And this turns a perfectly arranged flight into a trap. The worst part is that the crew is not waiting for a trick. For them, these openings are always accessible, always working. No one thinks, what if they're closed? It is the unexpected that makes the problem so insidious. Because aviation is based on the assumption that if 3 sensors are independent, then at least one will show the truth. But none of them had a chance in Brisbane that night. When an airport is faced with a threat that cannot be eradicated, it turns to another tactic. It teaches you how to live with it. That's exactly what the Brisbane authorities did. From 2015 to 2018, they observed mud wasps, recorded their activity, and checked dozens of cases where insects began to build nests right on the sides of airplanes. It became obvious that the population could not be destroyed. The fight against wasps is doomed, but it is possible to block access to the most vulnerable place for them, air pressure receivers. The solution turned out to be almost primitive. Covers, similar to red mittens, are put on each receiver. To make them impossible to forget, a long bright ribbon is attached to them. In aviation, it is called remove before flight, or in Russian simply remavka. This ribbon hangs and flutters like a bright flag that immediately catches the eye. The idea is simple. While the mitten is in place, the plane is not ready to take off. The airport has started sending out official letters to all airlines flying to Brisbane. They said, after each landing for the night or during prolonged parking, it is necessary to put on LDPE covers. This is the only way to make sure that the wasps don't turn the appliances into clay nests. But that's where the paradox began. The information reached managers, engineers, and technical departments, but often not to those who actually stood on the platform and performed the procedures. Pilots and technicians might not even know that the airport requires the use of plugs. Malaysian Airlines, whose A330 operated flights to Brisbane, officially agreed, yes, we will put on the covers. But in practice, this rule turned out to be blurred. They were used in some places and not in others. That's why the covers themselves have become a symbol in this story. On the one hand, they are the perfect protection. On the other hand, there is an additional risk. If they forgot to remove them, the plane remains blind. The case, created as a barrier, turns into a new security hole. Technically, everything is thought out. The covers must be stored in the cockpit. Before departure, the pilots make sure that all 3 mittens are in place. If they're in the cockpit, it means they're not on the sensors. This is how simple control works. But Malaysian Airlines has a different culture. The covers are almost never used. They were lying somewhere on the sidelines. They were removed from most of the cabins. and the checklist item turned into a routine. Removed, it was said automatically, without checking the actual availability. And again, the contrast. On the one hand, there is an international airport where every minute is scheduled, and procedures are based on the experience of thousands of incidents. On the other hand, there is the human factor. This has always been done, so everything is in order. A bright ribbon that is impossible to miss becomes invisible if the brain does not expect to see it. An important aviation philosophy is also evident here. Barriers only work when every step is completed. If information is stuck at the email level, if control in the cockpit has become a habit without verification, if responsibility is blurred between services, even the simplest measure turns into an illusion of protection. So in Brisbane, the small mittens on the air pressure receivers became the intersection point of two worlds: strict bureaucracy and living human practice. And precisely because of this, that evening in the parking lot of the A330, the chain of events started with treacherous ease. On July 18, 2018, everything started absolutely normally. The Malaysian Airlines Airbus A330 landed at Brisbane Airport in the evening, around 8 o'clock. The plane was driven to the gate, the pads were put under the wheels, the ramp was brought up, and the passengers calmly got out. Everything was going according to schedule. The liner was supposed to stay for 3 hours, after which a new crew would take it back to Kuala Lumpur. An airline engineer appeared on the platform. He flew in from Kuala Lumpur precisely to check the technical condition of the aircraft. He was soon joined by a local assistant who came with 3 air pressure receiver cases. He climbed the ladder to the bow, put on mittens on all 3 LDPE, the ribbons hung down, making the protection noticeable. The assistant honestly informed the engineer, "The covers are installed," but he didn't react. There was no entry in the technical journal. The engineer, who was busy inspecting and planning the oil refueling, apparently either did not hear or did not attach importance to this phrase. Airport cameras later confirmed that the engineer had indeed seen the dangling ribbons, but he only noted them to himself and decided that he would remind the assistant to take them off later. And then his attention shifted. It was necessary to fill up the oil, check the fluids, control the fuel supply. It's the same feeling that everyone knows. They noticed a detail, promised themselves to figure it out later, and completely forgot. At the same time, a new crew was preparing for departure at the terminal. The commander is an experienced pilot with more than 14,000 flight hours, but he flew on a Boeing almost all the time. He had only about 55 hours on the Airbus A330. In fact, he was a novice on the type. The co-pilot, on the contrary, had about 6,500 hours on the A330 and knew the car better. They decided that he would be piloting and the commander would be controlling. Everything is according to the rules. The commander had to make a pre-flight detour. The cameras recorded how he quickly walked along the nose, glanced at the left receiver, then at the right, and walked on. The covers with the long red ribbons were still there, but he hadn't noticed them. Psychologists call this inattentional blindness. Blindness of inattention. The brain did not expect to see anything unusual, and therefore ignored the signal, even if the eyes fixed the object. Next is the checklist. There is an item there: locking pins and protective covers. The co-pilot replied, "Removed." Why? Because that's how they always answered. There were no covers in the cabin, and they were almost never there. For Malaysian Airlines, this practice has become the norm. Protective covers were rarely used, which means that the check actually lost its meaning. The next barrier is the final external inspection before towing. This is the responsibility of the senior ground services technician. But here, another human subtlety intervened. The company had just changed contractors, and the new technician wasn't sure if he had the right to do this final round. He asked a colleague to help. He, in turn, decided that the inspection had already been completed. As a result, no one looked closely at the nose. Each thought the other had done it for him. So it turns out a picture. One person put the covers on and didn't convey the information properly. The other one noticed, but got distracted. The third did not see it because of the psychological effect. The fourth one formally closed the checklist item without checking the reality. The fifth and sixth divided the duty so that no one fulfilled it. And now the liner is ready for towing, The engines are starting, the ramp is driven away. The red ribbons are still hanging on the receivers, but now only the surveillance camera notices them. For different specialists, for different rounds, for chances to stop the chain. But none of them worked. And now the Airbus A330 is taxiing towards the runway, where in a few minutes the crew will find that the speed on the instruments is 0. Imagine the moment. The commander steps onto the apron to do what he has done hundreds of times before, a pre-flight detour. The procedure is well honed. You go around the plane in a circle, check the landing gear struts, flaps, skin, sensors. It's all part of the routine to ensure that the car is ready to fly. But it's the routine that sometimes becomes a trap. When the brain expects to see the familiar, it stops noticing the unusual. This is the phenomenon of inattentional blindness, or blindness of inattention. We literally look at an object, but we don't see it. The commander of the A330 walked along the nose. His gaze glanced at the air pressure receivers. Bright red ribbons with the words, "Remove before flight," hung on them. Anyone else could have said, "Well, how can you miss this?" But human psychology works differently. Under normal conditions, these covers should not be there between flights. And the brain, receiving an unexpected stimulus, simply ignores it. The same thing happens in everyday life. You're looking for the keys on the table, and they're right in front of your eyes. But the attention is occupied with other things, and the brain seems to erase the obvious. In aviation, this turns into a dangerous factor. Everything is checked. Everything is done according to the scheme, which means there is nothing unusual. And here a paradox arises. In the cockpit, pilots are required to trust the systems, but on the platform they rely on their eyes. And your eyes can let you down. At that moment, the commander did not see the covers, although objectively they were noticeable. He returned to the cockpit, reported on the completion of the detour, and the crew continued their preparations for departure. A checklist followed. It says in a separate line, "Locking pins and protective covers are removed." The co-pilot responds automatically, "Cleared." And this is perhaps one of the most dangerous moments of the entire story. Automatism in checklists is the enemy of discipline. In reality, none of the crew members saw the covers in the cockpit. But since they were almost never used in the company, their absence was considered the norm. No one stopped and asked, "Wait, where are they really?" That is why aviation always emphasizes that the checklist should be read thoughtfully, not automatically. If something seems illogical or falls out of the pattern, this is a reason to stop. But the same psychological trap has worked here. Habit is stronger than common sense. The contrast is particularly stark. Bright signal ribbons hang from the outside of the nose of the aircraft, visible from tens of meters away. Inside the cabin, the crew confidently says, "The covers are removed." Two worlds that should coincide have diverged, and no one noticed it. So barrier after barrier disappeared. Now the last line of defense remained, the final external inspection before towing. But it won't work either. At that moment, the cabin of the Airbus A330 was living according to a familiar scenario. Everything went as usual, calculating the takeoff parameters, checking the mass and alignment, and sequentially completing the points. One of them is locking pins and protective covers. Ideally, the procedure should be simple. Pilots physically make sure that both the pins and the covers are in the cockpit. If they're here, it means they're not outside. This is a simple but vital control. However, the situation at Malaysian Airlines was different. The covers were rarely used, so rarely that they were simply removed from most of the crew cabins. Pilots are used to the fact that this checklist item exists formally. The answer "removed" was enough. No one expected real cases next to them. As a result, an important barrier has become an empty formality. That evening, the co-pilot uttered the familiar word, "removed." The commander confirmed it, and both moved on to the next tasks. The red ribbons were still hanging from the nose of the plane, but in their minds, the plane was fully ready to take off. This moment is a classic example of how company culture can affect security. Even the most reliable systems lose their meaning if habit takes over. The automatism in the checklist is akin to the automatism of a driver who, without looking, ticks the check mark, belts checked, although no one really pulled them. As long as everything is going smoothly, it remains unnoticeable. But in a critical situation, the consequences can be disastrous. The peculiarity of aviation is that it requires not only professionalism, but also constant vigilance. Routine work deceives the brain. It seems that everything is under control because you've done it hundreds of times. But this is where vulnerability is born. The contrast is especially noticeable if you think about the philosophy of Airbus. The entire cabin architecture is designed to reduce the possibility of error. Many systems are backed up, readings are duplicated, but no technology is able to protect against an automatic removed, said without verification. The final line of defense was supposed to appear a little later. Ground services are required to conduct an external inspection before towing. This is the last chance to notice the tapes on the receivers. But even here, the domino effect will work. Everyone will decide that someone else did the check. Everyone has their own role on the platform before being towed. Some are responsible for the ramp, others for the luggage, and others for the fuel. But there is also a key figure, a senior ground technician. It is he who must complete the final external inspection before the aircraft starts moving. This procedure does not exist for show. It is necessary to make sure that all doors and hatches are closed, that there are no foreign objects, and most importantly, that all protective covers and pins are removed. The situation was ambiguous that night. Malaysian Airlines had recently replaced a ground handling contractor in Brisbane, and the new senior technician felt insecure. He was not completely sure if he had completed all the necessary training, and therefore decided to play it safe. He called for help from a colleague who was servicing another aircraft. And then what happened in aviation is called blurred responsibility. The first technician thought, since a colleague has come, it means that he will take over the final inspection. The second one was sure that if he had been called, then surely the basic checks had already been completed. As a result, none of them checked the nose of the aircraft, where 3 receivers were still covered with red mittens. At this stage, another factor intervened, the limited field of vision. The personnel in the tow truck could not physically notice the covers. They were covered by the cabin. The senior technician walking next to the plane also looked down, making sure that the path was clear and that there were no obstacles during engine startup. His attention was focused on the safety of movement on the platform, not on the bow. When the co-pilot contacted the technician and asked the standard question, "Are all the doors and hatches closed? Has the external inspection been completed?" The answer sounded confident. "I confirm." The phrase that was supposed to be the last barrier turned out to be just a formality. Here again, the principle of Swiss cheese works. Each layer seemed reliable in itself. The assistant installed the covers. The engineer noticed them. The commander walked around the plane. The checklist has been read. The final inspection was supposed to put an end to it, but the holes matched. The contrast is striking. In a system where every detail is detailed, where instructions are brought down to the smallest detail, the fate of a huge liner hangs on a thin thread of mutual assumptions. He will do it? They have already checked. For sure everything is in order, and now the A330 completes towing, starts the engines, and the crew prepares it for taxiing for takeoff. 3 bright red ribbons are still hanging on the nose, but now they have become invisible to everyone except the surveillance camera. The next stop of this chain of errors is the beginning of the run-up. Turned out to be a quiet night in Brisbane. There was practically no wind. Its speed did not exceed 3 knots. For the pilots, this meant perfect conditions for takeoff. The Airbus A330 is confidently rolling out onto runway 01. The crew is ready for acceleration. The co-pilot, who is assigned to pilot, says, "Takeoff." The commander confirms, "Check." The levers are switched to the flex position, which is the reduced thrust mode calculated for this departure. The car starts accelerating. Usually, already at a speed of about 30 knots, the instrument arrows come to life. But now the speed tape on the displays is stationary. Pilots are not worried yet. Sometimes the data appears with a slight delay, but at the 50-node mark, a red warning flashes on the screens. SPD flag. The system reports. The speed readings are unreliable. At this moment, the commander's breathing changes, becomes more frequent, more intense. On the recording of the voice recorder, he can be heard saying, "Speed, speed," briefly with emphasis. But right now, an outside conversation is playing on the frequency. The dispatcher and the tractor driver are discussing their business. This background robs the crew of a couple of precious seconds to concentrate. After a moment, the commander says, 100 knots. This is a standard cue, meaning that the aircraft has entered high-speed mode. Up to this point, any serious doubt is a reason to immediately stop taking off. After that, the philosophy changes. It is better to continue than to risk emergency braking in a short distance. The co-pilot hears this phrase and freezes. The captain just mentioned a problem with speed. And suddenly, the standard command, which essentially means, "We're moving on." There is a moment of indecision in the cockpit. The co-pilot asks, "Shall we interrupt then?" The answer is no. Psychology is playing a cruel joke. There are two experienced pilots at the helm, but their brains are overloaded. On the one hand, it is an alarming signal about unreliable speed. On the other hand, there is a well-learned rule. After 100 knots, we do not slow down unless something critical has happened. Every second adds pressure. The speed increases, the distance decreases. 118 knots. The co-pilot, trying to find a way out, suggests, "Go to ADR3, switch to the third air data block." Technically, this is the right action, but not at this moment. In the midst of a run-up, time should be spent not on experiments, but on deciding whether to fly or stay. But the pressure of the moment makes the reaction impulsive. The commander confirms, "Check." 3 more seconds, and the car crosses the V1 decision speed, and then reaches the estimated breakaway speed. The co-pilot pulls the steering wheel. The nose rises, the liner lifts off from the runway. The plane is in the air. There is still no reliable speed data on the instruments. Now the crew is in a situation where there is no way back. The plane had just left the runway. For passengers, this is a common moment. A slight push in the back, the sound of landing gear retracting into niches. But in the cockpit, the picture is completely different. There are red flags on the main displays, the instrument speed freezes at 0, then shows some unrealistic values. You can hear on the voice recorder, the commander asks the co-pilot if he is guided by the ground speed calculated by the inertial system. There is no answer as such, but one thing is clear. There is no reliable data anywhere. Under normal conditions, the Airbus A330 flies under the control of the normal law system, a set of automatic protections that prevent the pilot from putting the aircraft into dangerous modes. The system limits the angle of attack, monitors the overload, and stabilizes the course. But these protections only work when computers receive reliable speed and position data. Right now, the speed is 0 or jumping erratically. Computers, not trusting the readings, automatically disable some of the functions. A message appears on the screen, alternate law. This means that most of the usual insurance has disappeared. The aircraft remains in the hands of the crew. The situation is getting even more insidious because of physics. When the instrument speed is below 60 knots, the Airbus system discards data from angle of attack sensors, considering them unreliable. This is exactly what happened. Computers think that the liner is barely moving and do not take into account critical information. In reality, the A330 is already gaining hundreds of kilometers per hour. The co-pilot keeps a pitch of about 13 degrees, which is enough for climbing. But according to the procedure, in case of unreliable speed readings, the crew had to immediately perform actions from memory. Set a pitch of 15 degrees and toga thrust, the maximum takeoff. These steps are prescribed precisely so that the aircraft is guaranteed to remain in a safe range. But under stress, no one made them. After a few seconds, the co-pilot changes tactics. He reduces pitch to 7 degrees, switches thrust to max continuous thrust mode, maximum long-term thrust. A conscious decision. This way, the engines will be able to operate without overheating as much as they want, and the aircraft will gain altitude more slowly, but more reliably. This indicates a high level of knowledge of the pilot and the ability to think in a situation where standard scenarios no longer work. The contrast is striking. Outside, the night is calm, the sky is clear, and the weather conditions are perfect. But inside the cabin there is a real struggle for control. The liner is heavy, the inertia is huge, and the instruments do not give a single exact number. The landmarks are narrowed down to geometry: pitch angle, vertical velocity according to the variometer, ground speed readings according to GPS, which the dispatcher confirms from the ground. This is the moment when technology no longer leads pilots by the hand. Aviation is once again becoming a craft that requires instinct, memory, and cold calculation. The aircraft in alternate law no longer protects from errors. It flies exactly as far as the crew is able to keep it within the framework of aerodynamics. This is where the main thing is decided: whether the pilots will be able to maintain control of the car before it becomes possible to stabilize the flight and sort out the problem. At an altitude of only a few hundred feet, after separation, the crew finds themselves in a situation where every second is more expensive than gold. The Airbus A330, like any modern airliner, has so-called memory items, memory actions. These are simple but vital steps that need to be completed immediately without looking at the instructions. If the speed readings are unreliable, they sound unambiguous. Set a pitch of 15 degrees and toga thrust, maximum takeoff. These parameters ensure that the aircraft remains in a safe zone, even if the instruments are silent, but they were never completed in the cabin. Instead, the co-pilot continued to maintain a moderate angle and operate in flex mode, and then turned the engines to max continuous. From a technical point of view, his decision was logical: to ensure a stable set without overloading the power plant. But formally, it was at odds with the checklist from memory, which was supposed to be a safety cushion at this very moment. Why did this happen? The answer lies in the fact that such situations are almost never practiced on simulators. Pilots are regularly trained to abort takeoff in case of engine failure, fire, or wind shear. But the scenario of speed readings failing at the moment of takeoff or immediately after takeoff is too rare, too confusing. And therefore, when it happens in reality, the crew is inclined not to take drastic actions, but to try to figure it out on the go. And so it happened. The co-pilot suggested switching to ADR3, the third air data unit. By itself, this step is technically sound. A backup channel can save you if one or two receivers are faulty. But on this flight, the problem was that all three sensors were covered with covers. Switching didn't do any good. Moreover, the very attempt to perform such procedures during acceleration distracted from the main thing, from the decision whether to continue takeoff. And here again, human psychology manifests itself. Under stress, pilots tend to fix the problem more often than to act according to a strict scheme. It's a natural desire to figure out what's wrong in order to regain control. But every second spent thinking narrows down the room for maneuver. The contrast is striking. In textbooks, everything looks very clear: 15 degrees, toga, and the plane is safe. In a real cockpit, real people try to balance knowledge, experience, and instinct. And it was this pause between theory and practice that became the moment when the A330 took to the air without a clear picture of speed. Now the crew's task has become more complicated. At an altitude of several hundred feet, with red flags on the displays and without autopilot support, they had to make a new decision: how to stabilize the flight and prevent it from going beyond the limits of aerodynamic capabilities. The plane has already gained 1,000 feet, but there is still no clarity in the cockpit. The displays show red flags, the speed values flash on and off, and the crew tries to keep the car on a safe profile. At this point, a new message appears on the panel: autopilot off. The autopilot is unavailable, and now everything is completely in the hands of the pilots. The co-pilot, realizing the complexity of the situation, suggests, maybe we should announce a pan-pan? This is an important decision. In aviation, there are two levels of a radio distress signal. Mayday is an immediate threat to the people on board. Pan-pan, step below. The situation is serious, help is needed, but there is no immediate danger yet. The crew chooses him, showing composure. However, even this simple action is complicated. When the co-pilot calls the dispatcher 3 times, pan-pan, 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 Malaysian 134, unreliable airspeed, the frequency is silent. The tower manager is sure that the board has already been transferred to the next sector. departure dispatcher, that the plane is still on the old frequency. Inconsistency in the work of the services leads to the fact that the first calls are simply not heard. These minutes are like a stretched nerve. The co-pilot repeats the call, but there is still no response. At this time, the captain, who is busy steering, tries to maintain the pitch angle and monitors the climb. There is a tense silence in the cockpit, with only short remarks and commands. Finally, the connection is established. The departure dispatcher responds. Now the crew officially declares the problem. Pan-Pan has been accepted, and this means that the controllers are beginning to actively help. They clear the airspace, give priority, and give instructions on dialing and turning. An important skill of the crew is shown here, the distribution of roles. The commander is completely focused on piloting. The co-pilot takes over the radio exchange and controls the procedures. This is standard practice in emergency situations. One pilots the plane, the other conducts conversation and paper. It is this separation that saves the cabin from chaos. But even in such conditions, not everything goes smoothly. The captain starts working with the checklist, but the co-pilot stops him. Stop it. I need to focus on management. And this is also the right decision. There is a golden rule in aviation. Fly the aircraft first. Keep the plane in the air first and then do everything else. The contrast is particularly striking. On Earth at this time, life goes on as usual. For passengers in the cabin, the situation is almost invisible. The liner is moving smoothly, the climb is stable. But there is an intense struggle in the cockpit with the system, which has stopped prompting, and with devices that are no longer trustworthy. Now the crew has a chance to take a break and find a tool that will allow them to replace the usual speed readings. And here Airbus reveals its hidden trump card. After the first tense minutes of the flight, the crew manages to stabilize the car. The altitude is about 11,000 feet. The engines are operating in steady mode. The pitch is kept within safe limits. Now it's time to reflect what to do next. The unreliable airspeed checklist is opened in the cabin instructions for cases of unreliable speed readings. Usually, in such situations, pilots turn to QRH, a quick reference. There are tables there for a certain mass, configuration, and pitch angle. A specific thrust mode is set that guarantees safe flight. But there is a problem. All this takes time and calculations. Airbus has provided an exit. If the crew is finally convinced that all 3 air data channels are useless, they can be turned off manually. This is a radical solution. The ADR switches are switched to the OFF position. And at that moment, a special mode appears on the screen, backup speed scale, or bus for short. Bus is not an ordinary speed indicator. It does not show the number in the nodes. Instead, a scale with a green zone appears on the screen, a safe range of speeds at the current pitch angle and thrust. The red stripe at the top indicates the risk of exceeding the speed limit, and the red stripe at the bottom indicates the risk of stalling. In fact, it is a visualized QRH table embedded in the display. Now the pilots do not see a number, but a corridor in which they need to keep the plane. However, with this decision come limitations. Automatic systems lose some of their functions. The air brakes become unavailable, cabin pressure control switches to manual mode, and the autopilot is disabled. Even the landing gear will have to be released in an emergency using gravity because the normal system is no longer working. After landing, the aircraft will not be able to leave the runway on its own. The control of the nose rack is disabled in such conditions. But it's still a huge step forward for the crew. Bus provides a guideline that cannot be obtained from blind instruments. Now you can fly based not on chaotic values, but on a visually understandable range. The contrast is striking again. Just a few minutes ago, the crew was actually flying blindly, relying only on their instincts and the voice of the dispatcher, who transmitted the ground speed on the radar. Now they have a limited but reliable tool. It's like suddenly turning on a flashlight in a dark room. There's not much light, but enough not to stumble. The crew decides to return to Brisbane. Landing will be difficult. Weight advantage, lack of automatic systems, limited braking capabilities. But with bus on the displays, they have a chance to do it safely. The decision has been made. We return to the same 0-1 lane in Brisbane, but this time not in normal mode, but in conditions where half of the usual systems are unavailable. The first thing to check is whether the plane will be able to land at its current weight. Fuel is still almost full. It's a long way to Kuala Lumpur, and refueling was designed specifically for this route. It turns out that the landing will be carried out in excess of the permissible weight. This is not critical, but it requires careful calculations and an increased braking distance. The crew informs the dispatcher they will need a long straight line. This means that the approach will not be standard but extended so that there is time to stabilize the car, set the correct angles, and check the configuration. The dispatcher clears the airspace and transmits all possible information. Ground speed according to radar data, position relative to the airfield, weather conditions. The cabin is busy. The co-pilot conducts the radio exchange and monitors the checklists. The commander comments on each action. Pitch 7 degrees, hold. Thrust 70% N1. Now prepare to descend. Such voicing seems redundant, but it ensures the synchronicity of actions. When the instruments do not provide numbers, words become a control tool. Bus, the green zone that shows the safe range, is now working on the displays. The crew is guided by it and by the voice of the dispatcher, who transmits radar data every few seconds. Malaysian 134, ground speed 152 knots. These words are becoming a substitute for the usual scales for pilots. The passengers in the cabin are likely to suspect almost nothing. The lights are dimmed. The flight attendants are doing their duties. The liner is moving smoothly. But there is a tense dialogue going on in the cockpit, where every word is honed. No one raises their voice, but the tension is felt in the intonation. The contrast is huge. Outside, it's a normal night over Australia, calm skies, and a steady course. Inside, there is a struggle with disabilities, manual control, and the need to remember that even the release of the chassis will have to be done in an emergency way. And now, at an altitude of about 11,000 feet, the crew begins to descend. Ahead is a long 20-mile straight line to lane 01. They have time to prepare, but every configuration step, flap release, landing gear release, needs to be coordinated by voice and checked with bus. It will be a landing not on numbers, but on feeling and discipline. The Airbus A330 begins its descent towards the directional beacon. No autopilot, no familiar digital speed, just bus, the commander's voice, and precise coordination. Each action is spoken out loud. Collapse 1. Keep 70% thrust. Pitch 5 degrees. The co-pilot, who controls the car, literally drives it according to the captain. Usually, landing is a quiet routine. The autopilot holds the glide path. The pilots only control the parameters and are ready to intervene. Here, everything is different. The controls are completely manual. And the closer the lane gets, the more difficult the job becomes. With each configuration change, when the flaps or landing gear are released, the aerodynamics of the aircraft change dramatically. Automation usually smooths out these transitions by adjusting the pitch angle. But now everything falls on the shoulders of the pilots. The landing gear has to be released by emergency with the help of gravity. The mechanism opens the flaps, and the struts fall down under their own weight. But the flaps do not retract, they remain released. This increases the resistance and creates additional noise. For the pilot, this means one thing. The control must be even more precise so that the car does not go beyond the bus green zone. The dispatcher continues to help, transmitting the ground speed on the radar every few seconds. This data becomes another anchor for pilots. If it matches what bus shows, then the plane is going right. The contrast is especially noticeable here. In the cabin, passengers feel the usual decrease. Slight vibration, landing gear noise, and a gentle descent. Everything is going according to plan for them. And in the cockpit, it's a tense dance, a balance between pitch angle, engine mode, and the green area on the display. At a distance of 20 miles, the A330 captures the glide path using the ILS system. At this point, the captain begins to comment in more detail. The speed is decreasing, we are holding thrust, flaps 3, pitch 4 degrees. The co-pilot obediently executes each command. There is no room for improvisation here, only precise calculation. The decline continues. The lights of the strip are getting brighter. Now the main thing is not to go beyond bus and not lose control when touching. The car is ready, the crew is focused. All attention is on the last minutes of the flight. The glide path puts the Airbus A330 exactly on the axis of lane 01. The tension in the cabin reaches its peak. The pilots don't have the usual numbers on their displays, just the bus green zone and the ground speed that the dispatcher transmits from the ground. Ground speed 152 knots sounds in the headphones. This value is the same as the calculated value for a safe landing in this configuration. The co-pilot steers the airliner with jewel-like precision. The steering wheel obediently deviates. The captain prompts each movement. Slightly lower pitch, hold the thrust, hold the glide path. Lights are rapidly approaching outside the window, and the strip is growing in size. The touch is gentle, precisely within the landing zone. The landing gear released in an emergency takes a hit, and the liner remains on the axle. The co-pilot turns on the brakes. The braking systems are working normally. But due to the fact that the flaps of the chassis niches remained released, when touched, a characteristic screech is heard. They lightly touch the concrete. This is the only damage that engineers will find later. Braking is steady. The huge liner slows down and stops about 1,600 meters before the end of the runway. Silence reigns in the cabin. For passengers, it's just a landing, maybe a little tougher than usual, but nothing unusual. For the crew, it is a victory over a whole chain of mistakes and limitations. At this point, the contrast is maximum. From the outside, everything looks casual. The plane has landed, stopped, and a tractor is waiting for towing. But inside the cockpit, the pilots know that they have just driven a 200-ton car through a landing without a single reliable speed reading. They call the engineer and report the problem. He immediately remembers that he saw the covers on the receivers during his rounds. The chain is coming together. The plane stopped. There was no panic. No one was injured. But now we had to figure out exactly how a chain of minor omissions had brought the situation to the point where the airliner was flying blind. When the investigators began to unwind the chain of events, it became clear. It was a textbook on the James Reason model in real life. His Swiss cheese theory explains that every security system has holes, small vulnerabilities. They usually don't match and the barriers are triggered. But sometimes the holes line up in one line, and the threat passes through all levels of protection. The first hole appeared at the information stage. Brisbane Airport has been sending letters to airlines warning of wasps and the need to use protective covers. But these letters did not become part of the work culture. They remained at the level of paperwork and formal approvals. The second hole is the practice of the airline itself. The covers were rarely used, pilots were not used to seeing them in the cockpit, and the checklist turned into an automatic formality. This has weakened one of the most reliable barriers. The third hole appeared that evening when the assistant installed the covers and informed the engineer about it. The engineer heard it, but did not record it in the log. A small understatement has become a big problem. The fourth hole is a psychological factor. The commander simply did not notice the red ribbons during his rounds. The brain did not expect to see them there, and the gaze passed by. The fifth hole is the blurred responsibility between ground technicians. One believed that the inspection had already been completed, the other believed that a colleague would do it for him. In the end, no one checked. The sixth hole is the cabin. When the checklist reached the point about the covers, the co-pilot replied, "Removed," without checking reality. Automatism has become a substitute for conscious verification. And the seventh hole appeared already on the run. A problem with the speed indicator should have caused the immediate abort of takeoff. But stress, attention overload, and psychological inertia forced the crew to continue. All these holes are lined up in one line, and a threat passed through them. The Airbus A330 took off without working speed sensors. The contrast is particularly sharp here. The system, built on multiple levels of protection, proved powerless this evening in the face of a chain of human factors. Each participant did their job almost correctly, but almost does not work in aviation. This story has become an example of how security theory comes to life in reality. The Swiss cheese model has ceased to be a textbook diagram and has become a description of a specific flight, a specific liner, and a specific crew. After the incident with Malaysian Airlines Flight 134, the analysis specialists did the main thing. They turned the lessons into concrete actions. After all, aviation always learns from mistakes so as never to repeat them in the future. The first decision concerned documentation. Now, an entry must appear in the aircraft's technical log every time protective covers are installed or removed on the air pressure receivers. This simple rule eliminates ambiguity. If there is a recording, then the covers are there. If there is no recording, then they should not be there. The second direction is working with the crew. The pilots were advised to review the decision-making procedures in case of unreliable speed readings. Now, a situation where the instruments are silent on the run-up should be perceived as an excuse to immediately abort takeoff until the speed thresholds are reached. The third recommendation concerned ground services. The final detour before towing was declared a critical procedure. Responsibility for it should be clearly assigned to a specific person and not spread out between several techniques. No more someone else will check. The fourth measure affected Airbus itself. The manufacturer was asked to add more explicit and persistent sound signals to the system when the speed readings are unreliable. In conditions of noise and stress, visual indicators may not be enough, and a loud audio signal can attract the pilot's attention faster. In addition, crew training began to include practicing unreliable airspeed scenarios right on the simulators. Now pilots are learning not only to respond to engine failure or fire, but also to more insidious situations where the problem does not scream at the top of their lungs, but creeps up quietly, as on this flight. The contrast is obvious here. A small mistake by one assistant and the forgetfulness of an engineer could be very expensive. But new barriers, new rules, and new training sessions have grown out of these mistakes. And this is how aviation becomes safer, layer by layer, as if it closes the holes in the Swiss cheese again. When the Airbus A330 stopped on the runway in Brisbane, the story ended without losses. But its meaning is not in the happy ending, but in the price it was achieved. In the cockpit, two pilots, each with their own experience and their own set of knowledge, managed to separate the roles at a critical moment, stop automatic actions, and move on to the simplest and most important thing, to keep the plane in the air. The bus system has become a lifeline for them. She did not show a beautiful number, did not draw the usual speed tape, but gave what was needed that night, a guideline. Not an absolute number, but a safe zone. And it has become a symbol. When everything familiar stops working, even a limited tool can be crucial. But with all the importance of technology, it's always the person who decides. Someone who is able to admit, we don't know the exact speed. Someone who is ready to tell a partner, stop the checklist, I have to focus on management. Someone who can trust the dispatcher's voice and the bus green zone when the instruments are silent. The contrast of this story is that small creatures, mud wasps, began to destroy the system, and fully grown people who acted almost correctly completed the chain of errors. And at the same time, people were also able to save the situation. Disciplined, trained, ready to hold the plane in their hands for as long as necessary. Today, aviation remembers that flight as an illustrative example. It doesn't matter how modern the technology is, the holes in the system can match. But if there are people on the last line who do not lose their cool, there is always a chance for a successful outcome. And when you sit in the passenger seat, see clouds outside the window and feel a slight jolt when you touch the ground, remember, behind this is not only the power of the machines, but also the discipline of those who know how to take control at the right moment. This is where the real strength of aviation lies, in the combination of technology and human responsibility.